So you ever have one of those weeks where it just feels like, I don't know, everything's going wrong?
Uh-huh. Definitely know the feeling.
Well, based on some pretty interesting reports we've been digging through, it kind of looks like Donald Trump might have just had one of those weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. The information we looked at, it points to, well, him running into some serious roadblocks on several fronts, actually, this past week.
Right. I mean, we're seeing reports about international efforts kind of hitting a wall, in Gaza, Ukraine,
Yeah.
and apparently even a bit of a cold shoulder from Putin.
Yeah.
Then there's this stuff about a Qatari plane, some objections there,
Mhm.
a credit rating downgrade that made news, a budget bill that just stalled out.
Right.
And then on top of that, a Supreme Court decision that didn't quite go his way. It's quite a list.
It really is. And for this deep dive, we're going to unpack this using primarily a report we found from Occupy Democrats.
Okay.
But what makes it interesting is their analysis polls and commentary they saw on both Fox News and MSNBC.
Ah, okay. So
Yeah.
kind of a mix of perspectives feeding into their take.
Exactly.
So what we want to do for you today is really uh, get under the hood of these reporting challenges, try to understand the key takeaways from this look at what's being called a pretty tough week for Trump.
And what it might mean, maybe, looking ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And we're just going to focus on what the sources themselves are actually saying. Keep it focused on the material.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's dive in then. One of the first things that really jumped out, at least to me, was a pretty strong statement highlighted right at the top of our source material. Seems someone on Fox News didn't hold back.
That's right. Yeah, the Occupy Democrats report kicks off by quoting Fox News directly. They quote them as saying, "Donald Trump is the world's biggest loser."
Wow. Okay, that's blunt.
It is.
Now, it's important, for you listening, we should say we don't have the full context of that specific Fox News segment right here. So we don't know exactly how they built that argument or what surrounded that quote.
That's a key point. We're seeing the quote as presented by Occupy Democrats.
Right. But the fact that Occupy Democrats chose that quote to lead with, it definitely signals how they're framing this whole week for Trump.
Absolutely. Regardless of, the nuances or the full discussion on Fox News, Occupy Democrats is using that very direct, very strong language. It clearly supports their narrative that this was a challenging period. Sets a definite tone.
Yeah, a tone of perceived setbacks across the board, it sounds like. Okay, so speaking of setbacks, let's turn to the Supreme Court. This was flagged as breaking news in our material, a 7-2 decision involving Venezuelan migrants. Can you walk us through what happened there?
Sure. So the Supreme Court handed down a ruling, and it basically blocks the Trump administration, for now, from deporting a specific group of Venezuelan migrants.
Okay.
And the legal basis they were trying to use was the Alien Enemies Act.
The Alien Enemies Act. I mean, isn't that usually for, like, wartime situations?
That's generally the understanding, yeah. It's typically meant for times of declared war or, actual hostilities.
So what was the court's problem with using it here? What was the issue?
Well, according to Lisa Rubin, she's an MSNBC legal correspondent, and her analysis was included in the Occupy Democrats report we looked at.
Okay.
The court's decision really seemed to zero in on due process, the idea that everyone, even, immigrants who might be undocumented or even people accused of having gang ties, they still get due process.
Right. Basic fairness under the law.
Exactly. And while the court didn't say, okay, you need this many days of notice, they were very clear that the 24-hour notice these individuals apparently received, that wasn't enough, just insufficient.
Got it. So the court felt they weren't given a fair shake.
Yeah.
Not enough time to understand, maybe challenge the deportation.
Precisely. That seems to be the core of it. So because of that, the case is now going back down to a lower court.
Okay, and what happens there?
Well, that lower court has some homework to do. They need to figure out a few key things. First, how likely are these migrants to actually win their argument that the Alien Enemies Act is being applied unfairly here? And that means the court's going to have to wrestle with the language in the act itself, terms like predatory incursion or invasion or war. Do the current circumstances actually meet that legal definition?
That sounds like a really significant legal hurdle, a big question mark.
It is, yeah. And the lower court also has to figure out what would be appropriate due process here. Like, how much notice should these individuals actually get?
Right. If 24 hours isn't enough, what is?
Exactly. And the Occupy Democrats report, it also flagged a detail they picked up from NBC News.
Oh, yeah?
Apparently, these same migrants had previously been put on buses, seemed like they were about to be deported, but then for some reason they were brought back.
Huh. So this wasn't the first attempt.
Apparently not. Which just adds, another layer of complexity, suggests maybe prior attempts didn't quite work out either.
So the big takeaway here, as presented in the source, is that this Supreme Court ruling is basically seen as a legal setback, a stumble for the administration's immigration plans.
That's definitely how the Occupy Democrats report frames it.
Yeah.
As a failure, at least in this instance, to use that specific act for quick deportations.
All right. Let's switch gears now. Talk about the economy, something that's always on people's minds.
Always.
Our source material includes some commentary from Jessica Tarlov. She was on Fox News on 5. What were her main points about Trump and the economy as she saw it?
Well, Jessica Tarlov was arguing that the economy is like the critical issue for voters, right now especially. And she ticked off several specific concerns.
Okay, like what?
She mentioned tariffs, basically framing them as a tax that Americans end up paying.
Right, pass-through costs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She also brought up the recent downgrade of the U.S. credit rating, and she pointed to consumer sentiment in Michigan, said it saw a big drop, like 30% just since November.
Wow, 30%. That's pretty significant. What else?
She also talked about expectations that inflation might climb above 7% in the next year.
Oof.
Yeah. And just a general feeling of pessimism about where the economy is headed. Plus the failure of that budget reconciliation bill. She called it the big, beautiful bill, that it didn't get through the budget committee. And she linked that failure to potential pretty big cuts to Medicaid, something like $880 billion.
Okay. So her analysis, at least as reported here, paints a picture of an economy facing some pretty serious challenges, things people would notice.
Definitely. And she really hammered home the point that these are the kitchen table issues,
Yeah.
the stuff that directly hits people's wallets, their daily lives, and that's likely to be huge when they decide how to vote.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's circle back to Occupy Democrats. How are they interpreting all this economic commentary from Tarlov? How does it fit into their view?
Well, Occupy Democrats, they essentially agree with Perloff's take that Trump is losing ground. And they see it as a result of what they call failed policies, but also these legal challenges to what they term his authoritarian rule.
Right. Combining the legal and economic fronts.
Exactly. But their main point, really, is that it's not enough just to point out Trump's problems. They argue that Democrats really need to step up and offer a compelling winning vision for the country.
So it's not just about playing defense or pointing fingers. It's about offering a positive alternative, something voters can actually get behind.
Precisely, yeah. They need to articulate what they stand for, and they outline what they see as the key kitchen table issues that Democrats should be focusing on.
Okay, what's on our list?
It includes things like the cost of goods, naturally, raising the minimum wage, making childcare and education more affordable and accessible, tackling high healthcare costs.
Familiar themes.
Very much so. Plus, reining in corporate power, especially big tech companies, improving infrastructure, roads, bridges, and reasserting U.S. leadership globally.
That's a pretty broad agenda. Does this source mention any, specific actions or policies they think Democrats should push for beyond just the issue areas?
Yes, they do. Occupy Democrats proposes several what they call actionable goals, things they believe would actually help strengthen democracy itself.
Okay, like what kind of goals?
They mention implementing ranked choice voting, expanding the size of the Supreme Court, and also expanding Congress, and granting statehood to U.S. Commonwealth territories like Puerto Rico or D.C.
Interesting. So concrete structural changes they're advocating for.
Right. They present these as specific steps to, as they put it, uphold and revitalize democracy.
Okay. So pulling this all together then, this deep dive into the sources we had, it really paints a picture of a week that, had some significant headwinds for Donald Trump.
Seems that way based on this reporting.
You've got legal setbacks like the Supreme Court ruling, legislative issues with the budget stalling, and then these potential economic vulnerabilities being highlighted even by commentators on Fox News, according to the source.
That's a good summary. Yeah, the report definitely weaves together these different threads, legal, legislative, economic, to suggest a pattern of challenges.
And importantly for you listening, our goal here wasn't to, agree or disagree with any of this, but just to explore how these events are being presented and analyzed in the source material itself, trying to understand the narrative being constructed.
Exactly. It's about laying out the information that's in these reports, showing you the different perspectives that are being brought together.
Right. So maybe as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. When you consider these reported setbacks, the legal stuff, the budget, the economic anxieties we talked about, and then you also consider the strategies being proposed on the other side, the Democratic focus on kitchen table issues and those structural reforms, what do you see as the most critical factor shaping things moving forward?
Good question.
Is it going to be the outcome of these legal challenges? Or is it more about those economic worries? Or maybe it's just down to which party can actually articulate a vision that really connects with people.
Lots to chew on there.
Definitely something to consider until we dive into the next set of sources.